Good choice.
So to get it started.
Good, thank you. I need, get your two sisters. Anybody else? Right?
Yeah, my two sisters.
Those are the only ones.
Bobby already has.
Maybe we should move down.
You get the two sisters over here, please.
Hi, Rabbi.
Oh, I thought I did. I forgot I did this.
I'm
So why is she
Michelle.
introducing herself?
You meet a lot of people like that.
Michelle.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Glad to meet you. We talked on the phone.
Yes.
Put it over here on this side. You'll put it on your jacket. Transfer it to us. Hey, Dad. If I could ask the three of you to please stand. Over here, please.
Don't keep trying.
So what we have done is affix these ribbons. It's actually part of a tradition called Kriya, which you've heard before. Kriya simply is a word that means torn. It goes back to the Torah itself, the very beginning of the Torah. Our ancestors learned of the death of a loved one, they would tear their clothes as a sign of their grief. Even today, there are many Orthodox Jews, particularly, but others as well, who will ask me to come with scissors and tear their coat, or tie, or their belt. We are fixing a piece of clothing and tearing it instead. The symbolism is the same. It's to show on the outside, tear on the inside. Nobody can see that your heart has been torn and the loss of your family. And when they know our Jewish traditions and they see the torn, usually clothing here, they'll know that you celebrate this. We wear these ribbons for 7 days, take them off and show them really. And just a little more calm before we actually go to Baruch atah Adonai melech haolam dayan haolam.
Hold on, let me tell him that. He's not on. Let me tell him. Hold on, the Facebook thing. This is definitely. It's working. I mean, it's one of the grandsons is trying to get on.
Oh,
Can I just call him real quick?
Sure.
Did we call him? Well, my phone's not on. So. Just call him and tell him it's Facebook.com, Austin Natural Keywords. No, it's Facebook / Well, he knows how to get on Facebook.
I can't hear y'all.
He's having a hard time. My brother's son's having a hard time getting on.
Hey, did you get on? Okay, fine.
Oh, he got on.
Got on.
on?
Okay. He's on. Okay.
Turn your phone on.
We're going to begin this afternoon with the reading of the 23rd Psalm. Yismor le David, Adonai roi lo echsar v'no deshe yar b'tzeini, al mei menuchot yanahaleni, nafshi yeshovev yancheni v'magalei tzedek l'man shemo, gam ki alech b'geit al mavet, lo ivra ra ki ata yimadi, shivtecha mishantecha hema yanachamuni, ta'aroch labanai shochaneget soderai, dishanta v'shemen roshi, kosi revaya, ach tovachetsid yerdefuni, kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'veit Adonai, le'orech yamim. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He has me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He guides me on paths of righteousness. He revives my soul for the sake of his glory. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your staff and your rod do comfort me. You set a table in sight of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall abide in the house of the Lord forever. This afternoon we have gathered for the saddest of tasks, to say a loving farewell to our beloved father and brother and grandfather, and of course friend, Sigmund Jucker. Sigmund was well known in our community, as his past weekend's testimonials to him in the Houston Chronicle and on our local television affirmed. He and his brothers earned their fame as the three brothers, whose bakery was an integral part of the Houston Jewish community and Southwest Houston for 71 years. Can we even begin to count how many Houstonians over the years have marked the start of Shabbat, week after week, with the three brothers' challah, or the pastries for their child's bar or bat mitzvah party, or family celebrations, wedding cakes, and for most of those 71 years, Sigmund was in the bakery before dawn, preparing the cookies and muffins and breads and pies and Hamantaschen, my personal favorite. So when the donors would finally open, to everyone waiting anxiously for their orders. As someone who was born and raised here in Houston, I remember as a child going to Three Brothers with my mother. I loved going to the store as a child because it was like a weekly family reunion, and I always got a cookie. How many years ago that was that I still remember. I never understood why it seemed like every Jew in Houston was in the Three Brothers Bakery at the same time my mother was, every week. Interestingly, while my mother and all the women in my life complained about the kosher butchers, I never heard anyone complain about Three Brothers Bakery. To the contrary, no event was perfect without Three Brothers rye bread or challah or bagels, since they were the only bakery who everyone said knew how to make these products right. For Sigmund and his brothers, Saul and Max, being bakers was their livelihood, yes, but it was also their second home. Sigmund often worked 16 hours a day, 6 days a week many times, for more than 50 years to establish a business that would become Houston's premier bakery to the Jewish community. And even after he retired, his presence was still felt, as his interest in the bakery and his well-being never waned. For years, Three Brothers was a small business, but a good one. Amazingly, it supported 6 families for some years. You could scarcely be a Jucker without having a little baker's flour in your soul. And how happy and proud Sigmund was when Bobby took it over, keeping it in the family and taking it to new heights with his wife Janice. It was a hard life Sigmund lived, but here in his adopted country, he had a good life too, raising his 3 children, Bobby, Susan, and Michelle, and enjoying later in life the blessing of 5 grandchildren. Stephanie, Jordan, Evan, Jason, and Josh. He loved them all, but he was consumed by his work, and at the same time, burdened most of his life by the harsh memories he had brought with him from Europe, where life even before Hitler was never easy. Like other young Jewish boys across Poland, he went to Cheder, which he hated, and Jewish Scouts, which he loved. Though Sigmund and his brothers Saul and Max and their sister Janie were poor, they were never hungry. Indeed, their mother found not only enough food for the family, but also welcomed people to dinner who had, she said, even less. Still, the family's financial condition required young Sigmund to start working when he was just 10 years old, standing alongside his twin brother Saul in the family bakery. Who could have imagined that years later, the experiences they gleaned in a small town in Poland would give these three brothers the skills to make a success of their lives as bakers one day in America. Sigmund loved telling stories about those early years. Their bakery was famous, he always said, because Napoleon had slept in that very building years earlier. He remembered fondly riding his horse and buggy to villages all around, selling and delivering bread. Though he worked hard his entire childhood, he loved playing soccer in the streets with his friends whenever he had the chance. He loved athletics as a boy, but unfortunately didn't have much time to fulfill that passion until many years later when, as a grandfather, he enjoyed playing sports with his grandchildren. Life changed for the Jucker family in 1939 when the Germans invaded their little town. Sigmund was 16 and struggled with the occupation and the limitations imposed on him and his family. For their own safety, the Jucker children slept under the floor each night. But after a while, Sigmund couldn't take it anymore. He told his parents he was going to Russia to find freedom and work. He got a job just across the Russian-Polish border, working in a mine. Soon he contracted black lung and might have died had it not been for a nurse who took such good care of him. When he was stronger, he got a job working at a bakery, which had a big oven, which was nice and warm for him to sleep on each night. Meanwhile, his mother was worried about him and anxious for him to return home. She paid people to go and find Sigmund, and on the third attempt they did. Miraculously, he was found just hours before the Germans came into that small Russian border town village and murdered everyone there. Back home, he found himself sleeping under the floor again, and again he couldn't stand it. He was a strong and fit young man, so he decided to do something brazen. He turned himself into the Nazis, hoping they would find work for him to do. And not surprisingly, they did. They sent him to a concentration camp where he was assigned the task of taking materials that the Germans acquired from homes they had destroyed and reusing those materials to create new and nice homes for Germans and German supporters. The beams and materials were heavy, and Sigmund was a very strong young man, and the work he did built him up and likely helped keep him alive for the duration of the war. He was also helped, he told his family for years, by a discovery he made while working one day. Inside the beams and materials from one of the old houses he was working with, he found a 5-pound bag of cocoa. For months, while other Jewish prisoners were fed soup mixed with sand, and in the process dying from malnutrition, Sigmund and a friend had a teaspoon of cocoa at each meal, which they felt kept them alive. At another camp, one of Sigmund's duties was to wake the people in the camp each morning. One day, however, he forgot, and as his punishment, he was forced by his Nazi guards to roll on the ground around the camp for hours. Again, his strength and endurance enabled him to survive what might have killed a weaker person. In all, Sigmund was in 21 camps, including 8 that came to be well known as among the largest and most notorious. Miraculously and thankfully, he survived them all. Finally, a day came when Sigmund awoke, prepared to wake up his fellow Jews, when he noticed there were no guards anywhere to be seen. The SS officers had fled without turning on the electrified fences, so he used wire cutters to open the gate. With his first breath of freedom, according to his family, he fell and literally kissed the ground. Liberation Day had arrived. Soon, American soldiers rolled into the camp and began offering candy and other foods to the starving prisoners. But Sigmund wasn't feeling well that day, declined the soldiers' rations. Sadly, many of those who took the GI's food died. Their decimated bodies were simply unable to digest so much food so fast. Sigmund instead found himself sick in a hospital. His life saved because he had been too sick to eat the food he had been offered. His experiences in the war never left him. For almost all of the years that followed, Sigmund was obsessed with watching documentaries about the Holocaust, replaying over and over in his own mind the horrific things that he had seen. He was weighed down for decades emotionally and spiritually by what he had endured. It was not until many years later that something happened to change Sigmund. When at the Medallion one day here in Houston, he told Bobby that he didn't want to talk or think about the Holocaust anymore. And he didn't. He was done. It had racked his heart and soul for decades. But at last he wanted peace, to be free from the grip of his painful past. And he meant it. I've always stood in awe of men like Sigmund, men and women who left Europe broken and empty, yet were somehow able to find the strength to start over in a new country with a new language, who went on to build new lives, create new families, raise children, feel and share love, even as they always carried the painful memories of their past buried forever inside them. For many, like Sigmund, it meant working hard and focusing on their work so they wouldn't have time to think about their past. It meant never allowing yourself to feel too happy, too contented, just because you were lucky enough to have survived and so many you loved had perished. For Sigmund, it was a lifelong struggle. Sigmund loved his children and provided for their every need, but it meant long hours away from home and not always being there for them emotionally or physically. He provided stability for his children and kept them safe, and tried his best to be there for them best he could. On Mondays when they were young, he would take the kids to Astroworld, then to Luby's for dinner. It was his way to reach out to them, to show them that he cared about them and loved them. He bought a lake house in Conroe where the family enjoyed going, where they could canoe and have fun. He took the family skiing and made sure that each of his children went to college and mastered the tools he felt they would need to be successful in life. Because of all he went through in his early life, he had a very different outlook to share when his kids might come to him with their problems at school or with friends. He would caution them to keep their problems in perspective and to realize that in the great scheme of life, what they were dealing with was ultimately very small. It may have been a hard lesson for a child to hear such advice, when to them, problems at school and with friends were very, very important. But it did instill in them an insight into what was really important and what maybe wasn't. Their father taught them also to be independent, which was ultimately a positive thing too. Over the years, he was close with his brothers and sister, and especially his twin brother Saul, and he fondly welcomed Janice and Jeff, and then Alyssa, into the family. By the time the grandchildren came into his life, Sigmund was a different man in many ways. As happens with most of us as we grow older, Sigmund began to mellow, to soften, and perhaps most of all, to be able to let himself enjoy life fully. Being with his grandchildren opened him up emotionally in ways that he just couldn't earlier in his life. He loved playing with them, roughhousing with them, skiing with them. He tried being available to them and openly showing affection towards them. He had a lighter touch with them, hiking, going to the zoo, going to important events in their lives, and vacationing with them. Now in his later years, he found that they filled a need in his life that he'd been unable to fully appreciate before when he'd been younger. Additionally, he built special relationships with all of his many nephews and nieces, who became like children to him and came to mean so much to them. It might be said that the last 10 to 15 years of his life were perhaps his happiest, as he finally allowed himself to fully enjoy and value the people in his life to an extent he just couldn't before. Today we come to mourn Sigmund's passing, but to mourn, too, everything he was forced to endure that deprived him of a normal childhood and the inability for too many years to shake his painful memories out of his heart and mind. In the end, as he looked back on the fullness of his life, it seems he found some of the joy that had eluded him so long. And for that, let us be grateful and remember him for all the ways he tried so hard to be a good father, a good brother, a good grandfather, and a good friend to many. He tried so hard to give his children everything in the best way he could, and to give our community the best bakery and all the special and delicious cakes and pastries and breads that have lightened all our lives for generations. We will miss you, Sigmund. Now may you go to your eternal rest and take with you the love that our community and your family holds for you and has held for you in life and always will. Zichrono livracha. May your memory ever be for a blessing. Amen. We have a few members of the family who would like to speak. Susan? You want to go first? I have no particular order. I'm not sure exactly who's coming up. Speak directly.
Most people who knew my dad,
Can't hear you.
can't hear me.
Sit right to the mic.
Most people who knew my dad knew him as a Holocaust survivor and owner of Three Brothers Bakery. They knew him as always working hard to build a successful business. They knew the bakery had the best cakes, breads, and pastries in the city of Houston, if not the state of Texas. No bias there. They knew my dad passed his legacy to my brother Bobby and my sister-in-law Janice, who run the store today and continue the tradition. I would like to share a few things about my dad that most people didn't know. My dad was an excellent student and loved math. He could calculate numbers in his head faster than I could write them on a piece of paper. We used to try and stump him, throwing out numbers multiplied by other numbers to see how fast he could add them up. He always got them right. My dad loved opera and classical music. I remember as a teenager being dragged to Jones Hall to see Madame Butterfly in La Boheme. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I have good memories now. Can I take this off?
Yes.
Up right into it.
Speak right in.
My dad never ate any sweets. I always marveled at my dad's sheer will and determination. How many people could work at the best bakery in town but never eat any of the sweets? My dad, of course. From the minute he found out he was a diabetic at age 40, he stopped eating anything with sugar. Although everything he ate was healthy, my dad had a voracious appetite. Even at his old age, he could eat more than anyone at the assisted living. In fact, they had to make a special menu for him. Dad had a passion for exercise and eating healthy. He was into juicing, bee pollen, vitamins before it was popular. He swam, rode a bike, worked out regularly. Dad introduced us to snow skiing at an early age, and we were hooked. It gave him such pleasure to ski with us during our family vacations to Vail and Breckenridge. He skied until early 70s and would always comment how he could ski for free because of his age. He loved soccer. He would call it football. He didn't like American football. He loved watching it and playing soccer with his grandchildren when they had practice for their games. My dad hoarded toilet paper before the pandemic. Since he was a survivor, we always were prepared for any catastrophe. Come to our home at any time, and we always had a supply of paper, canned goods, and most sale items. My dad was dependable. If he said he was going to do something, he always did. I always knew growing up I could count on him. My dad was a humble man. He was always appreciative of what he had and never wanted for more. He loved nature and the outdoors. He was always happiest being outside and could spend hours in the Houston heat. He loved his children and grandchildren and would do anything for them. He was the hardest working, most disciplined person I have ever known. As a side, Jeff and I were empty nesters for about 3 days when Hurricane Harvey hit, and my dad ended up living with us for several months. It was a blessing in disguise. He really enjoyed his time with us. Long walks, late night movies, chats by the fire, teaching Jeff to make rye bread, and so many memories that we will always cherish. Dad, I know you are with your parents, twin brother Saul, your sister Jamie, and brother Max. You are not physically here anymore, but will always remain in our hearts. Love you.
Bobby.
I think that what was said here today was really who my dad was. He was a millionaire. He had the wrong kind of dough, though. But in his mind, he had the right dough. Food for him was like being a millionaire because he knew what it was like to be hungry. He felt like being here and feeding his family, and he was a millionaire, and he will be missed. He was a great dad. He made mistakes, but we all make mistakes, and we all have things that aren't perfect. But he was a good dad, and we will be missed.
I was told Josh might want to say a few words.
So my earliest memories of Zadie, or Sigmund, called him Zadie. You know, he and I always had a special relationship, and I remember my mom telling me a story about how even when I was a baby, he was watching me, and she came back, and we were both sleeping together, and so we were always very, very close. I got the pleasure of kind of seeing a different side of him when I got to work at the bakery. And he always had the same personality whenever I came to talk to him. He was always excited to see me, and he always wanted to know what was going on with me. And whenever I would ask about the bakery, his whole demeanor would shift. He would get really serious, and start telling me how things needed to be done, and then of course start into one of his stories about what he used to do when about him waking up or being there at 5 a.m. And I just really got to see a different side of him. And I also got to visit him so much when I was working there. So that was always a plus. He was always extremely special to all of us, and I know we're going to miss him. I didn't think he could, I thought he was just going to be here forever because he always kept himself healthy, and he just seemed like he was just a train that would never stop going. But we'll miss him, and we have so many great memories, and we'll cherish them. My brother also couldn't be here, so he actually has texted me a few things that he wanted to say. So, he said that he's sorry that he couldn't be here, but he's here in spirit. He says that I'll miss him dearly, but I know one day things will be different, and we'll be together again. I love you, Zane.
Most people know my grandfather as Sigumund Jucker, Holocaust survivor and founder of Three Brothers Bakery. I know him as Papa, a loving, kind, incredibly smart and humble person who loved his family deeply. He miraculously survived the war along with his 3 siblings. He came to this country with nothing and ended up living the American dream. I remember asking my grandfather how they survived. He never went into detail but mentioned it was his will to live. He explained one of his jobs at the camp was to scrub the kitchen floor. He went on to say his brother was very sick and needed food to survive. My grandfather risked his life by hiding a slice of bread every day from the kitchen to feed his brother. There's truly no greater act of kindness. It was the same deep love he had for his family that carried throughout his life. Papa loved his family and equally loved the bakery. Some of my most cherished memories are going to the back of the bakery and seeing Papa in action. Oftentimes, when people would find out my grandpa started Three Brothers Bakery, they would ask if I got a free cake or cookies from time to time. I would explain we had 3 freezers in our home to keep up with the goods we were sent on a weekly basis. We would get moving boxes full of baked goods, from the best challah to bagels to cookies, and my personal favorite, Boston cream pie. Papa was the most disciplined person. He's the only person I know that could work 15+ hours a day in a bakery and not eat one sweet. Health and wellness were at the forefront of his beliefs. Speaking of health, I remember when he first moved into his assisted living, he asked that they spruce up the workout room, as it currently wasn't in use by any of the residents. He planned on working out every day, all while 93 years old. My grandpa never liked to be the center of attention. He was extremely humble. He didn't need awards or press on his business. His product spoke for itself. He was quietly generous, a true mensch. Being the only granddaughter, we had a special bond. I would ask Papa, jokingly, who is your favorite grandchild? His response, my Steffi. I will miss his kind nature and the way he loved his family. I will take with me the health and wellness he practiced throughout his life. I will think of him anytime I eat a bowl of veggies or work out. I love you, Papa.
I'm now going to ask everyone to please rise for the memorial prayer. El Malay Rachamim Shochein Ramaromim Amtsei Menucha Nefanata Kefei HaShekhinah B'malot Kiroshimu Taharim Kezahar Kirmasirim et Nishmat Zelek Abraham ben Boris Hakadosh Baruch Hu Shalach Olamo Began Eden Tehemen Uchato Ana Baal Rachamim Asti Rehu Besetu Kenafecha Laolamim Utzlor Bitzvol HaChayim et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato V'yanuach Beshalom Amishkavo V'nomar Amen. O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of our beloved Sigmund Jucker, who has gone now to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we remember you, we beseech you, remember all the worthy and righteous deeds this good man performed in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal. May he ever rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. May we see.
No, that's okay. It's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you don't have to. No.
Take a picture of that.
I'm now going to invite the mourning family to please stand as we join together in reciting the Mourner's Kaddish for the first time in loving memory of our beloved Sigmund. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah v'yalma divrach Yerutei v'yamlik malchutei v'chayechonu v'yomechonu v'chayenu kol beit Yisrael v'agala u'vizman kariv v'imeru Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbah mevorach le'olam elomei Amaya Yibarak v'yishtabach v'yitbahar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal Shemei v'kudesha v'richu Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran v'yalma v'imeru Amen. Yehei Shalama Rabbah min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael V'imaru, Amen. Oseh Shalom Imromah, Uyaseh Shalom Aleinu, Ya'kol Yisrael, V'imaru, Amen. You may be seated. Some of you may know that the beautiful casket in which Sigmund will now lie in eternal rest was made for him by hand by his son Bobby. I didn't know you possessed that talent in addition to your many others. But I think what a beautiful tribute and testimonial this is to your love for your father, that this beautiful casket, as nice as any I've seen, was created specifically for him. And it's a beautiful gesture. It almost didn't fit, but it did fit. It was meant to fit. Right? And so now we come to the last thing we can do for Sigmund, and that is to see that he's properly covered and laid to rest. Our tradition teaches that we can ask people to help us do many things, even prepare for this day. But when it comes to finally preparing your father for eternity, that last mitzvah should be done by those who knew and loved him in life. That's something we don't ask others to do for us. So I'm going to invite the immediate family to come forward and place those first handfuls of earth upon the grave. And that will end our service here this afternoon. Notice that because of the COVID-19 virus, we have many rules in place here in the cemetery. One of them is that we do not use shovels and spades because these things should not be passed among one another. We do have the earth to be placed upon the grave. What you do is you just take your hand. It's just sand. It's not dirty. It's sand. Just put it in there. Okay? So I'll begin by inviting the immediate family to come forward. I'm going to start by placing some earth from Jerusalem.
Something else I wanted to do. I wanted to throw those things. Is that okay?
Sure. You want to say something about them, Bob?
So this summer, Janice and I went to Oregon, and I happened to get some cattails. These are not like from cats, like plants. And I want to kind of just toss them over his grave and just let them go. And anybody else that wants to do it, they're welcome to.
And if you'd like to help in the filling of the grave, you're more than welcome to step forward.
How do you do that very well?
I'm not doing that. I stand back there. Weeds that grow up.
They're beautiful.
It looks like a hot dog.
It looks like a hot dog.
Oh, of course. The eulogy I gave? It's yours. You can do whatever you want. Okay. My doctor says you're good to go. Your doctor says here. Doctor says you're in great shape except for my shape.
Story about how when we went skiing in Colorado and you and Zadie were in the same room. And I learned that night that I never was in the same room. Oh, no. It wasn't even that. It was a loud snore. Dad and Zadie were literally complimenting each other. So it was like,
I'm jealous.
exactly. It was a cacophony of snores. We're seamlessly together.
That was like cats over everything.
Oh, that would have been so funny. That would have been, or Rydo. Just something that would have been funny. I wish he brought a shovel.